So I just came from a discussion group where we were talking about actually how to have a good conversation. So we're having a conversation about how to have good conversations. And one of the last discussions or the questions that we had was, what's some of your hot button topics that you don't like talking about, like don't like discussing? And for one lady, it was she hated talking about religion and politics, which is funny because that's actually one of the rules of the group, is to avoid religion and politics because people tend to get heated and kind of irrational. They stop listening. But that was exactly it for her. Was she doesn't like that most people who talk about religion and politics, they get into this mode of they just like talking and they're right and they're not open to anyone else, and if you're wrong, it's that dichotomy of in religion and politics that if you're not with me, you're against me. And it makes a lot of sense because a lot of people are like that when they talk about religion and politics. But I thought it was interesting because for me, I actually like discussing emotional and passionate topics like religion and politics for various reasons. But for one thing, I think it's interesting because this idea of religion and politics or something like that, like the reason why people don't like having those conversations is because people talk without intent of listening. And when you get into that mode, like I'm sure we've all been in those conversations where the person we're talking to does not want to listen. They just want to teach and lecture and preach, and no one likes to be in those conversations. And that's why people don't like other people who talk about religion and politics, because it tends to be, you listen to me, and it's not this open dialogue and discussion. And I think that's for me, that's a big thing. Is, look, I love talking about emotional and passionate topics, but as long as you approach it with, this is what I believe and this is what I feel from my personal experience, but I'm open to listening to what you have to say, and I value your opinion as well, and I don't think you're wrong or right. I just want to hear and kind of have that discussion, that dialogue. And I think that's important for any conversation, especially when you talk about your opinion and controversial type topics of that, is to have an open mind and to listen. No matter if you think you're right, there's never really a right or wrong answer. And so I think it's very important to do that, is to always be open-minded and listening. And another thing that was brought up was how sometimes like the people who are the most closed-minded are the ones who are the most adamant about their things, and they subscribe to this whole basket of beliefs, and then they say these things like, oh, I believe this since I was little, and this, and then you listen to them and you're like, what did you just say? Like, you believe this stuff? Like, that's kind of outrageous. And it's kind of unbelievable, but it also makes sense because I, in my personal opinion, I think the reason why people are so adamant and so vocal about their opinions in that sense is because they're insecure about because they don't inherently believe it themselves. They're just subscribed to it, and they have kind of like this shallow foundation of what they truly believe. And so they know that the rock that it stands on is not very solid. So if you ask them questions like, well, why is that? They don't have an answer. Well, I don't know. I'm like, that's just what I believe and it's right. And so they're defensive, they're insecure. On the opposite side of the coin, someone who is secure in their beliefs and knows what they believe and whatnot, who's truly secure, just like anyone in life, they won't be afraid of what someone else has to say. And they're also open-minded to listening and to have that discussion and that valid conversation, and not trying to persuade, but more just to listen and understand. And going off of that, I read in a book somewhere that the reason why it's hard for us to really listen, to really empathize and understand someone else, is because there's an inherent vulnerability in trying to understand and listen to someone. Because if you truly try to empathize with someone, they're going to change your beliefs, right? Because if you're truly receptive to what someone is saying, it's going to rock the core of what you believe. And to have that not fallibility, but that flexibility in your ideas and to rock your belief systems, it's a very dangerous thing to have. And so that's why there's always a part of us in our mind that kind of closes off if we hear someone else's belief that's different from ours. We tend to put our guard up because we don't want our beliefs to be influenced and changed. And so that's the hard thing, is knowing that you have to have, having beliefs and values that you can stand firm on, but also being receptive and open and listening and seeing the value in what other people say. But at the same time, drawing that line so that you don't feel so insecure and vulnerable of truly listening that your own beliefs get changed so easily, because that's a protection mechanism that we have, is just knowing that fine line, but also just, being open. And I think that's the key takeaway, and the thought of the day is probably that we have to really, good conversation is all about listening and valuing the other person and helping them feel heard, and understanding that when you contribute to a conversation, you have to have that dialogue and not be so closed-minded, but to be open-minded in conversations. And understanding that being so open-minded is scary inherently because it has the ability to change our beliefs. And so that's the thought of the day on how to have a good conversation.